In this video, I wanted to review the 4 sets of rocks, the rock types that you examined in Activity 3 of Chapter 2. I just wanted to do a quick review of the ways that I would describe these rocks and sort of bring your attention to what I think are some of the important features. I know that it's a little bit difficult to make these kinds of observations on the photographs that we have compared to how we would normally do it in class with the specimens in hand. Normally you would be able to hold them, sort of look at them closely, use a microscope, and talk about your observations with your group members, and I know that that wasn't possible this time. So rather than have you sort of rely alone on your own observations, I was going to weigh in. So we'll start here with Group A. I'm just going to open up the picture of the whole suite. I'm not going to zoom in on the individual rocks, and I'm not really going to focus on each individual rock, but using this picture, you at a later time could open up the sort of individual photos of each of our 10 specimens and take a look at what I'm talking about. So the thing that I think bridges or links all of these specimens together is that they are rocks made up of pieces of other stuff. If you look very closely at some of the photos of the individual specimens that I provided, you'll see that some of these specimens are what look like a big rock that's made up of pieces of other rocks. Some of them look like rocks made up of grains of sand. Some of them seem to have shells in them, and some, like this one, seem to be made completely of shells. So I think that the characteristic that bridges this group, even though these specimens all look pretty different from each other, are that it's a rock made up of pieces of other stuff. You might even call that made up of sediments, for a little bit of a hint there. But again, if you pay really close attention to the photos, that you can see individual pieces of other stuff that make these rocks up, and they appear to be sort of glued together. Oops, I didn't mean to zoom in there, so we'll zoom back out. Okay, so now let's go to Group B. Again, I'm going to open up the picture of the whole suite. And Group B is kind of difficult to figure out what ties all of these rocks together. So I just want to take a look at some of the characteristics that I think are noticeable. So one characteristic is that a lot of them appear to have sort of lines in them, or to be made up of sort of layers. Some of those rocks in this category, like this one that I'm highlighting here, are a bunch of like sort of flat lines or stripes, and some of them are a little bit more wavy like this one. If you were to look more closely at specimen 4, which I'm highlighting here, you'll see, if you see it from a different angle, that it really does have a wavy shape. So it's like layers of rock that are kind of wavy is one characteristic that's pretty common in this set of rocks. Another characteristic that you can see in some of the photos, but is also a little bit difficult to tell from photos alone, is that many of the rocks, let's zoom in a little bit here, in this suite are kind of sparkly. So if we look at this one does appear to be kind of flaky and made up of different little layers, but it's also very sparkly. And obviously I'm not using geologic terms in this description, but that is something that I would notice as a key characteristic of rock group B. The other thing is that many of the rocks in this group are sort of darker in color. That's not true for all of them, right? So the 3 that we have down here are a little bit lighter. This one also is kind of like lighter gray, but many of these are pretty dark in color. So those are some characteristics for Group B that I would pay attention to. If we go to Group C and open up our group photo, this one is also a little bit sort of difficult to figure out what bridges them together. So I actually am going to zoom in here and take a look, excuse me, more closely at some of these. And so one thing that many of the rocks in this group have are sort of like bubbles or air pockets, and you can see that more clearly if you look at the individual photos of each of these. So like this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, they all have these sort of air bubbles in them. The other thing that you might notice, oops, if you were to look more closely on these, is again that many of them are dark in color. This one is very glassy, so if you were to turn it over in your hand, it looks like a hunk of black glass. And then these two over here are sort of they have one material that they're made up of, and then little individual crystals of a different material within it. So it's like two different components that make up this rock. Again, these ones are a little bit hard to link together, but I think that those air bubbles are a key identifying characteristic. Okay, and then let's finish out by looking at group D. If we take a look at group D, these ones, I would say they look a little bit more similar to each other than some of the other groups. So one thing that you'll notice if you look at this group is that you can see big individual crystals within the rock. Those are the individual minerals that make up this whole, the whole rock. So we can zoom in, and on this one there's a black mineral and a white mineral. This one there's a few different colors, but you can sort of tell these individual crystals apart. And same as we move through all of these. So these are all sort of rocks in which you can see the individual crystals that make up the rock as a whole. I hope that this discussion has helped you figure out some of the key components that link these suites of rocks together. I know that you've also already learned some of the geologic terms that we use to describe rocks, the different terms that we use that are sort of the formal jargon. And you've also read about the 4 rock types. So when you put all of that together, you should be able to figure out which of these rocks is which. Remember, the 4 rock types that we talk about in this class are igneous intrusive rocks, igneous extrusive rocks, sedimentary rocks, and metamorphic rocks.